or some was complicated because there were so many different levels of concern, just from the project itself, and then learning in depth the lack of health and health care for certain areas in our community, the disparity in investment from the city in those neighborhoods, and so it and the lack of engagement with our community, that how much our community is disengaged from what happens in City Hall, until there's some big issue, and then there's a lot of press and maybe more people learn about it. But just the fact that this could have been so devastating for not only for South Vallejo, but in particular South Vallejo, that how much more harm it could have caused, and that the people there, because they're going on with their day-to-day lives, they're not focused on what's going on in City Hall. They're just trying to keep a roof over their head and get their kids to school. They're not paying attention to stuff like environment and how important it is for them to know where they live and what their environment around them, how it impacts their health. So it was a multi-level awareness that happened, and we're still working on it. There's still, you still see, even in elections now, how few people come out to vote. And these are people that they're putting into office that impact their lives. And so just that ongoing need for community awareness and education on environment, is important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How did you first hear? How did you first find out about it?
I was thinking about that, and it had to been through Colleen. We had been hearing bits and pieces of stuff happening in what was going on in the community, and like, oh, there's this cement plant that wants to come to South Vallejo. And so we were hearing bits and pieces, but then I think talking with Colleen, she says, well, I've got a group that's meeting, and we're looking at the documents, and so come join the group, and so we could put this information out to the community. And so I started going to what we called her book club, um, which was interesting because you had a whole mix of people sitting either in their living room and dining room and wherever else we could fit people, or sitting out in the backyard on the patio, and talking about different sections of the documents that they had submitted. And so the more that we started looking at it, the more concerning it became. And so it was such a crazy idea that, there's no way in the world the city's going to accept this. There's no way in the world that they would do this to, the people in South Vallejo. Why would they think this is a good thing? So we kept moving forward, thinking that at some point the city's going like, yeah, this is a bad idea. We're not going to do it. But that's not what happened. So we continued to have the meetings, and then also looking around the room, identifying the fact that there was a lack of diversity in that room. The people that were being impacted were not part of that discussion. And so we knew that we had to branch out and do more community outreach and go door knocking and talking to people. And so just trying to divvy up the work that needed to be done was monumental, because we had a lot of ground to cover.
Okay.
Yeah, the county does a county health report,
Yeah.
and so they had just done one right at the time that the discussion, when it was going to the planning commission.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were lucky enough to use that data to show the asthma levels, the cancer levels, the high blood pressure levels, in South Vallejo.
Yeah.
And so, and this data is readily available for anybody. So we were just concerned that the way that the company was going to painting their company is that it was going to be so good for the community, but skipping over the fact that they were going to add pollution to the area, and it was already impacted. And then like, it's just a little more pollution, it's just a little more pollution. But the fact that this and all the other things that have impacted that community as far as pollution is concerned is just on top of everything else. You're going to add 300 diesel trucks running through a neighborhood, and like, who would think that would be a good idea?
Well, yeah, I mean, I moved here when it was like the height. I mean, I moved here like in 2016, the height of it. And I was like, what the hell is this for real? I mean, I'm like, is this the mid 20th century? I mean,
So we were going backwards,
yeah.
and the interesting part was, even before we got to the point of talking about what the company actually was going to do, is that the city allowed them to get a lease, a 50-year lease on property on the waterfront, with no idea what they were going to do with it, except for this concept of maybe, we'll have a port, maybe we'll make cement, but we're going to bring jobs. And you give them a 50-year lease and you have no idea what they're going to do. That's the craziness, and also learn how frail our government system is and our policies are, because there should be things in place that are already there for protections for the community, that you don't have to go through these fights, that anybody that comes to town saying, oh, I want to build such and such, if it's a detriment, then you already know that. So they're like, you discourage them from the beginning. You don't wait till they purchase property and moved in and started fraternizing with the community, that you say, oh, it's a bad idea. So it just showed how frail our government is in regards to protections for our community.
Well, yeah, and just the abuse because of people being demanded to sort of prove what they know and what they already know.
Yeah, yeah. And it was amazing because if you listen to the policymakers, it was like, oh yeah, we got all this information, and oh my goodness, once we got the information, that information came from the community. There was no pushback from the city. The city did a good job when it went to the planning commission. Once it went to the planning commission and they appealed, then the city kind of said, okay, council has to tell us what to do. So council's response back and the city's response back to this appeal should have included all that information about the health detriments, and the how the idea of putting a cement factory in the middle of a residential district, all those things should have been on the city's report, and it was lacking. And it was a shame, because if somebody knew that data was available, it wasn't being put forward to the city council. And so it's interesting to hear now when politicians are looking back and are like, oh yeah, we've got all this information. And when the more we read it, that was information we kept giving them. And we killed a forest with the amount of paperwork that we gave to the city, just sheer data. Lori Alio's environmental justice report was spot on, and she highlighted a lot of the health detriments that were readily available if somebody just wanted to look, and put it together in a document and gave it to the city, and they totally ignored it. They totally ignored it. So it was like we were hyping up people's bad health, to
Yeah.
get rid of the project. It's like, no, this is real. This is what people are dealing with every day. And, even for myself, um, because I was diagnosed with asthma late in life. It wasn't until the wildfires started up and we started getting all that smoke in Vallejo that I found it. All this time they had been treating me for bronchitis, and what it was that I had untreated asthma. And so I know plenty of people who have asthma. I knew children who suffer from asthma. I knew the effects of, how scary it is for anybody to see a child that's having an asthma attack, and in the hospital, trying to breathe. And it isn't until you experience that, where you can't breathe, that you get a full experience of, how bad it could be. And mine is not my asthma is not as bad as a lot of the children's are, because they have to be monitored, more frequently than I did. And so the whole idea was just crazy. Like, how could the city even think about that this would be a good job? I don't care how many jobs it gave, how much money it brought into the city. All money is not good money. So
Yeah.
it was just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, I mean, some of these illnesses are, I mean, when they're chronic and terrible, but not dramatic. And so, like, oh, this kid has asthma, and you just need to put it all together.
Yeah.
And when they have asthma, it means they can't go out and play, and it just keeps snowballing for problems.
And if you're sick, you can't learn because you're
Yeah,
at home being sick.
yeah.
So you're setting kids up to fail from the beginning. And just the fact that one of the things that we learned is that 1 in 3 children in the school district in South Vallejo carry inhalers. 1 in 3. This is like a typical thing for kids to have. When I was growing up, it was rare that we saw kids with inhalers, in school especially.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
grew up in a town that had a steel plant. So the pollution there was horrible, but you didn't see as many kids. Probably now you do, but back then you didn't see as many kids that were having to take medication to school because they would have an asthma attack. Some of
Mhm.
them, took it seriously because we gave them a lot of data too before, we got there. We gave them packets of information about stuff, and then we hadn't even really dug into the deep dive of health issues, and environmental justices. So some of them were paying attention. I think I know at least one who had interest in all things, bringing port, open them port up, bringing ships in, and so I don't think there was anything that we could have said that would have changed that person's mind, that
Yeah,
they wanted that project, and that was it. And it goes with a number of people that were involved that we didn't know that were involved behind the scenes, that were meeting and talking with these people, from ORSM, and BMT, and had no idea that they had been talking with them and actually encouraging them to move forward with the project before the public even knew about it, um, which is disappointing because those people are should have at least had some awareness of what that impact would be for South Vallejo. But when it comes to wanting economic development for the city of Vallejo, sometimes we're too eager to turn a blind eye to the negatives, so just so that we could say that we're bringing business in.
well,
It
yeah,
was a learning experience
yeah,
because even in that, I there were certain community groups that I had access to more readily than other people, only because of my interactions with them in the past. And so, I said, I don't mind going to the NAACP. I don't mind. And, I was curious at the NAACP because one of their platforms is EJ, but they didn't want to get involved. So going to the African American Alliance and going to these groups and talking to them and telling them why they need to get involved and why there's such a big concern, because when you hear the policymakers saying, environmental justice is a white thing, you're like, no, it's not. It's because the whole reason we had to talk about injustice is because of the injustices done to communities of color and to poor people. So it's not just a white thing. It's just that those people are the ones that are more apt to start looking because they have the privilege to go to school and learn about more things. And we learn going knocking on the doors. They're going like, well, they're saying they're going to give us jobs, so why would you not want us to have jobs? You're gonna like, but what good is a job going to do if your kids are in the hospital every day because the asthma is increased? And what good does it do if your kids can't go to school because the air quality is so bad? And so, trying to talk to them and on that level to get them to understand it's not an either or. It's an and, jobs and good health. And so, just trying to get that message across, and even with our own politicians, you know fighting against us, saying, oh, you're just using the Black community, you just because the people don't want to lose the value of their property, so you're just using the Black community to talk about it. And this is coming from Black leaders, instead of the fact that you're looking at this is bad for that community, and so how can we work together to try to raise the awareness level and to make good policy decisions so that we don't impact them even more. So, just that whole thing was crazy for me because um I'm not looking at it as a Black person going out into the community. I'm looking as a person who's lived in the community for many years and knowing that those impacts, how they are unequal in certain parts of the town, trying to get people to understand that, and being told that I was being used by the environmentalists, or that I was a token, to show up. They're like, no, I truly care about the environment. I truly am aware of the fact that there's kids that are suffering because of decisions, poor decisions that were made in the past. South Vallejo has always had issues. Way back in the 90s, we were trying to start a community garden before community gardens got to
Oh,
be the
yeah.
thing.
Nobody had heard of them
Um,
back then.
yeah, and so um, through Fighting Back Partnership, Don Burns, who used to work with them, he was scouting out areas that to see where we could put a community garden. And so he found this plot in South Vallejo, vacant plot, had water on it. So apparently there's a house or some structure there at some point. So found out it belonged to the city. The land actually belonged to the city. So he said, okay, can you let us use this land to grow vegetables on? And he lined everything up. He had like Home Depot and all the different nurseries, a couple of farms in Solano County. They'd given him seeds, and Home Depot was going to loan him the tools and stuff to get the garden boxes set up. So we were all ready to go, and then the city says, "Oh well, we go and test the soil first before we let people dig in this dirt." It was so contaminated.
Oh, yeah.
It was so contaminated. We're like, okay, so if that soil is contaminated, how many other people have already started growing garden stuff, and they're eating the stuff that's coming out of that ground? How much contamination is it? They've never done a study. And it had to, all of the stuff that was on Mare Island had to blow over to South Vallejo. So we don't know how bad that soil is. And so, we started telling, don't dig in the ground. If you're gonna grow a garden, put it above ground, because
Raised beds.
unless you get your soil tested,
Yeah.
you know, there's no telling what's in that soil. So South Vallejo's had a history of having contamination in the neighborhoods. And so it just brought a more of an awareness of how the city has not paid attention to some of our areas that really, really need to have help. We know now what's needed. Well, we know basically what's needed for EJ policy element for the city. And so the city is still struggling to put its housing element out, and still haven't even started discussion for EJ and for the safety element. But we know that it has to be a strong policy in order to protect people going forward, because most of the people that work in City Hall are new. They're only been here for a few years, so there's no history for them to go back on and saying, oh my, no, we can't do that. Remember what happened to the community when we did that? So there's no history with them about decisions that were made before. So unless you have strong policy to keep it moving forward, and then depending on who's in office and who's not, who's going to push that policy, it has to be there to protect the community. And also the city needs to start talking about what it's going to do moving forward to change what they've done, and the lack of investment in those communities, and how they're going to do things that are um, restore the healthiness of those communities, because that should be a focus that the city should be looking at now. And when you're talking about equity,
Yeah.
talk about a lot of the kids are poor, so it's impacting the healthcare system because they're in the emergency room instead of going to regular checkups, so that they are monitoring their asthma and making sure that a lot of parents do what they need to do, but they can't control the outside elements, and the environment. And so it's up to the city to help them on their part to make sure that they're cutting down on pollution and polluting acts within the community, because the parents are doing what they can to keep their kids healthy, but
Yeah.
they need help from the city as well. They need policy that's good, that so they don't have to worry about somebody coming in and making a decision that a cement plant is a good idea. But we still have a lot to do, in lessons learned. We need to start moving the city to looking at all decisions that they made through the lens of equity. Other cities have hired equity operations managers that that's their job, is looking at all decisions that the city makes, is it through the lens of equity, so that you're treating people fairly, and that communities like South Vallejo and North Vallejo that have been neglected for decades, that you finally start paying attention to trying to fix up those neighborhoods as well. It's not just about downtown or Mare Island, the shopping plaza. It's the whole community. If you don't start paying attention to the people that are trying to keep your city going, the people who pay for the bills to keep City Hall open, if you don't start treating those people fairly, then it's a negative in how people look at our city. Because you look at cities that are supposed to be really nice to live in, it's because government makes sure that the things that the community needs is addressed. And so we can't just keep ignoring the fact that these things happen. And a lot of it was through racism, that they put house poor people all in one location, or the people weren't able to buy homes except for certain locations, and then come to find out those locations were not good because of the pollution that was there. Those are conscious decisions that were made by some policymakers at some point in the city, and the city needs to address that. Yeah, it's all in how you present it to you.
Yeah.
You've got to take information to people where they're at, um, to make it relatable why it's important for them to pay attention. And so when you start talking about the asthma rates, and you're like, how many people in your family have asthma? You know, you start, and this, you get them to start thinking like, why is it that, everybody, how come you'll have 5 members of your family that have asthma? What's going on? Why do you think, that they have so much asthma in your family? Getting them to look at just reality stuff,
Yeah.
and it opens the door for them to start thinking about it. And I'm like, well, wouldn't you rather live in a neighborhood that, your kids have better air to breathe? Wouldn't you rather have kids outside playing where you don't have to worry about if they're going to have an asthma attack because, there's too much pollution? So there's a way to address it, to get them to at least listen to what you have to say. You can't go in and saying, this is all bad. Look at these numbers. Look
Yeah.
at these numbers. They're bad. You need to come out and protest. You're like,
Yeah.
not really. I've got to figure out how I'm going to pay rent next month. So yeah,
Yeah.
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 So you just have to make it relatable to the community on their level, and why it's important, and and that you want the best interest is for your kids to grow up healthy. You want to be able to have a community where you can go outside and breathe, and that the city is addressing anything that's polluting the community, and that they are making sure they're taking steps to not add to that. And
Yeah.
even at that, when we have 700 pages to start, and then I think there's a couple of thousand more pages,
Yeah.
addendums and added stuff
Yeah.
that they had. Some of the stuff didn't make any sense whatsoever, and you just knew it was just part of or some trying to snowball the city into thinking that they're doing the due diligence in providing all this information. But you find out that their testing was flawed, if they did testing at all. The consultants that they were using, they didn't even have an office space. They had a PO box in some shopping center. Like, who are these people that you're paying this money to inform the city about potential health risks? And so the whole thing was flawed. And if we could see it, if the regular everyday people in the community can dig through this stuff and see it, and and let me take a step back. We have some awesome people in Vallejo. We have some awesome, smart people in Vallejo that have experience in many of these things about planning, about economic development, about health issues. We have a ton of people that we, came out the woodwork and lend their expertise to what we were doing, and at least gave us questions so that to point us in the right direction of what to look for. So we have an awesome community in that, because all the people that got together, they had something to offer, to make a better, stronger case against the cement plant. So we have awesome people, but the fact that all of the, almost, I would say 90% of the data that we provided to the city, what came from the community. We had consultants, we had an attorney that was helping us, but it came from people in the community that were digging through these things, saying, no, that these numbers are not right. We had Jay Gunkelman, who was a scientist, and we had Jeff, who was, worked in the science. And so we had all these phenomenal people that were adding to our fight, which was wonderful. But I think the thing for me that was most important was the validation that came from DOJ, because when we got the letter from it was like an early Christmas present.
Yeah.
We were so happy, because almost everything that was in the DOJ reports, it was telling that how the reports that ORSM had submitted were flawed, we had already addressed. So this just came back to validate what we were saying all along, that we have the numbers that are better numbers than the city has, better numbers that the ORSM had provided. And so the DOJ was so important to come in, and it's rare that they get involved in this type of issue on the level that we were at right at the time, because we weren't even in court. That they came in and validated what the people in Fresh Air and the other people in the community had been saying all along, and saying, and you can't accept, and told the city, you can't accept this, you've got to go back and you've got to get better data. And so I think that was the turning point, is that we had the DOJ's report, because as soon as that came out, then the city said, okay, here's the list of things we need you to do. And we've been telling them all along, this is the stuff that you need, but they didn't pay attention. But now DOJ's behind it, like, okay, so now we really need to get this data. And that's where you started to see the process with ORSM fall apart, is because they weren't willing to spend any more money to do the actual real EIR, or in the environmental impact report as it should be written with the truth. So DOJ really came in, and it's amazing how many times the DOJs have to interject into city government processes, because obviously we don't know what we're doing. You would have thought the city would have learned from the LNG fight, that the community is going to come out anytime you put something crazy like that, that's polluting and dangerous on our waterfront. That that our waterfront is our jewel. And instead of trying to find things that will take away from the beauty of our waterfront, you keep finding in this industrial complex that needs to be there, and their presence isn't necessary on our waterfront anymore. If you're going to do it on the Mare Island side, because they were equipped for it, but not on the community side, because that's our last. We've got a natural waterfront. There are very few cities that are left with a natural waterfront. So that's what you should be capitalizing on, and making it healthy and good, so that people could go out and walk, and kids can play outside, and really highlighting our city, using those resources instead of putting a cement plant on the waterfront. The idea is so crazy. But you would have thought, that they learned from the fight, and as big as the fight was with LNG, and all the people that came out, and all of the negative press that the city got from it, you would have thought that they would have learned from that. But like I said, there's no history in City Hall. There's nobody there that can point back. Well, there's few people that are still there, but not many. They can point back to those fights and say, the community really doesn't want this type of thing here. And so we need to think about, how we're going to move forward. And so, once the LNG was done, we thought we were going to be done with putting crazy stuff on the waterfront. And then here comes another proposal. And like, we couldn't possibly really think this is a good idea. But yeah, they did, You had the secret group that was meeting, trying to accommodate some, and they weren't even a stakeholder at the time. They hadn't even got all their permits and such. So, but they're using the fact that they want to bring ships in because they want dredging done. So they figured, well, if we give them, their cement plant, at least we'll get some dredging done. We could do other things. And like, what about the community?
Yeah,
Yeah, just be happy that give you
exactly,
2 jobs. Like,
exactly.
why do we have to settle? Why
Yeah,
can't we expect more? Why do we have to settle for the crumbs? You've
yeah,
given them crumbs all their life. All the 40, almost 40 years I've lived, and they've never paid attention to South Vallejo. They've never paid attention to area the Beverly Hills. They never paid attention to the Crest or places like the Delta Meadows or College Park. These places just existed, and there's been no resources put in. And this is another history that the city has. We had redevelopment area for the Crest. The whole idea was that it was going to uplift the neighborhood in the Crest. It was going to build more homes, bring more businesses in, bring more money into that neighborhood. And what they got for it was Marine World. And what are they getting from that? No, other than the noise and the traffic over there, what are they getting out of it? They got nothing out of it. So the city has been backwards in how they view community, and so they really need to start paying more attention to and reinvesting in community and making quality of life the focal point, instead of, it's not just economic development, because your health and well-being is also economic development. Well, we had the asbestos on Mare Island.
yeah,
You should have learned from that, on all the people that got sick, from asbestos, from because the government wasn't paying attention. Like, we need this right now, build it, we'll figure out if it's good for you later. Like, no, start from the beginning. Things that they have to acknowledge their part
yeah,
of the things that were done wrong historically. Um, and so once you acknowledge that these things, they'll say they exist. Oh yeah, the health is bad in South Vallejo, but they won't acknowledge the part that it was by design that they put poor people out there, or people, people of color out there because they couldn't live anywhere else. And so why would you allow people to build out there if you knew the land was polluted? Why would you put them in that? How come they can't live, in good neighborhoods with fresh air? And so the city has to come to some point where they're acknowledging the wrongs and the harm that they did to the community. And there's nothing wrong with that, because you can't learn and grow if you don't acknowledge, what you've done wrong in the past. Because it became a regional thing. We knew our voices weren't being heard in just Vallejo itself. So we had to expand, because there were plenty of environmental groups in the Bay Area. So we started going to their meetings
yeah,
and, and telling them what was going on in Vallejo and asking them for support, or, do you have any information that could help us? And so that's how we were able to attract, the 60 plus organizations that sign on with us, because of the outreach that we did. And even at that, it still could have been even more that we did, but we wanted other groups to pay attention to what was going on in Vallejo, because we're part of a region of pollution.
yeah,
We suffer from some of the same, things that are happening with the refineries and the ships and the traffic coming through. All of those things are suffered and shared by communities within the Bay Area. And so going to those groups and talking to them and aligning with them and supporting the work that they did, so that they could sign on and endorse our work that we were doing was monumental. And to have that kind of coalition. And so we still have those relationships, which is good, because we know what's going on in other cities. And so the stuff that we want to do is not something we have to rewrite. It's already there. We just need to tailor it to what Vallejo needs.